Hi, everybody. Thank you for that video. This session is actually sponsored by the Creative Content Agency, also known as KOCA. They're a South Korean government agency, a part of the Korean Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism. KOCA and their partners support the advancement of Korean creative content industries such as gaming and broadcasting, animation, character licensing, music, comics, fashion, and emerging technologies such as AR, VR, and XR. KOCA works with companies from all stages of their projects, from story development, project planning, production, investment, marketing, distribution, and global business expansion. Thank you for hosting this session. For those of you who are joining, feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourselves, and we'll have a short Q&A after this session. If you have any questions, please use that chat box to bring up those questions. Today we're going to be talking about Korean content and its international growth. Director Bong from Parasite said it best. He says, once you overcome the 1-inch barrier of subtitles, you will be introduced to so many amazing films. And we would like to add TV shows. So I'm your moderator, Kimber Lim, producer and consultant focusing on Korean crossover content and local language projects, and a huge consumer of Korean content. I'd like to welcome our panelists, Greg Plutis, president of Smart Dog Media, Justin McKinney from Korea Content's platform. She's the product marketing manager, and Eric Barmack, founder of Wild Sheep Content. So we're going to get into just talking about, what seemed like an impossible thing even a decade ago, where there was no shortage now of how Korea has been influencing everything from food to K-beauty, webtoons, K-dramas, music like BTS is everywhere. You see them everywhere. Director Bong's Oscar for Best Picture this year. And also MIPCOM just named South Korea the country of honor for all of its global success in Korean television and film. So to get started, I'd like to ask Craig, you are one of the innovators of reality programming. Can you tell us more about Smart Dog Media and how you went from NBC into adapting Korean reality formats for the U.S. audience?
Oh, of course. My pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I had a great journey before finding The Masked Singer. I've always loved reality programming. I started off in marketing over at NBC, and eventually became the head of reality over there for a good number of years. And I had a lot of hits. I got, America's Got Talent, Deal or No Deal. I had a lot of failures as well, but mostly hits. But it was a learning experience about trying to find formats from around the world. So I really became invested in traveling, especially to Europe initially, and looking for formats before anyone else found them. Obviously, it's easier now than when I first started off. But I really looked for trends, and I also met with a lot of broadcasters because to find out what they're buying, not just listening to sellers and looking at trends within different marketplaces. But it truly was The Masked Singer that brought me into the Korean landscape and really discovering everything about what's out there. I discovered Masked Singer by accident, to be honest. I was working on another show. And I went to a Thai restaurant for dinner with my family, and my daughter saw it playing on a TV set, and it was a Thai version of the Korean show, and it fascinated me. Everyone in the restaurant, no one was eating their food, and I was watching it on the screen. I got what it was right away, took out my phone, searched it, found out it's a huge hit in Korea, huge hit in Taiwan. Any market that it went in, it was a huge hit, and I'm like going, oh my God, I got to try to get this. And literally, during the course of dinner, I didn't even talk to my family. And I found out who had it over at NBC, and also through just all the details about it. and a few days later, I was able to get the rights to the show. So I'm really, it was really lucky for me to do that, and shortly afterwards sold it to Fox. It happened fairly quickly. It doesn't usually happen that way. This one it did, but it was a gamble. It was a strange show. First of all, it wasn't like an easy sell to Fox, and it wasn't an easy show to cast. It was a really bizarre concept that paid off, and it shows you again, if you think differently and if you're not duplicating other kind of formats, if you think out of the box, you get a huge hit, and we did.
We'll definitely talk more about that in detail as we get through the session. I'd like to ask Justine, if you can tell us about yourself and about Cocoa and what that stands for and how it formed, because I don't know a lot of its history.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank Coca for hosting this panel. It's so great that we have a platform to talk about Korean content. My name is Justine, and I run marketing at the Korea Content Platform, KCP, and we run the streaming brand Cocoa. Cocoa actually stands for the Korean Content Wave, and that's literally what we're doing. We're bringing the content wave from Korea. We're a joint venture started by the top 3 broadcasters from Korea, SBS, KBS, and NBC. So, we're bringing all of those dramas, competition shows. Actually, The King of Masked Singer is one of our original properties. So thank you, Craig, for making it even more popular. It's been funneling back to us as well. But yeah, so basically we are the IP holders, and we're here to bring Korean content to the Americas. And we've been able to build this really unique audience across the Americas and, of course, in the US. And thank you, Kimber, for moderating. I'm really excited to talk about the future of Korean content and how Cocoa is going to help with that.
Great. Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your former role over at Netflix International Originals, and tell us about your new venture now at Walchi Content?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I just want to say I'm excited to have the same Zoom style that Craig has. So I feel like we're kindred spirits here. I was at Netflix for a little over 8 years. In the last 4 years, I headed up what was then a new initiative to do local language production. So basically all of the productions that were outside of the US and Canada. And the mission originally was that we should be, if we're going to be a global company, we should be investing in productions around the world, partially for good publicity, goodwill of investment in local stories, and also to help build interest in Netflix in those particular countries. And so we started with one production in Mexico, which was Club de Cuervos, and then that one became 10. And by the end of it, which was kind of 2019, we were doing over 100 productions per year. And they included shows like Dark out of Germany and Casa de Papel out of Spain, Sacred Games out of India, and Kingdom, which was our first Korean production. And I would say like the biggest pivot that I think surprised all of us was that I think we knew that these shows would be big for building up interest in Netflix in those markets. But our big surprise was that once we were doing shows at the highest quality, we saw that shows from Korea, from Germany, from other places had just as good of a chance of traveling around the world as US shows if we held them to the same standards. So that we started to see shows from Korea and Spain, markets that were used to exporting content, reaching tens of millions of people. Once the idea that subs and dubs were available everywhere and that you weren't competing for shelf space on the 8 to 11 o'clock cycle on a linear channel. And so that was really, really eye-opening. Kingdom was a huge success for us. And over the last year, I've kind of left and built my own production company and have been able to set up now 8 projects with 4 different streamers. And I think from the sell side perspective, international content is only growing. There's going to be greater interest as these streamers try to become more and more global. And there's going to be particular interest in markets that are great at producing dramas that aren't just good for their local markets, but good for a region or good globally, which Korea definitely is, as you know.
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, one of the major propellers that helps spread K content is the rapid advancement of streaming. With so many streaming platforms out there, it seems like that Korean content being more accessible than ever is definitely having its moment with all the fans around the world. Justine, can you tell us about some of your top markets that are viewing Korean content and the demographics that's watching?
Right. So Cocoa is distributed throughout the Americas. So I'll just quickly focus on the international bit. US, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina are our biggest international, our biggest our most viewed countries. And then within the US, actually, our top cities are the metropolitan cities, but also, you know, Houston, Miami's pretty big. That's still a big city, but LA, New York, Houston, Miami, Chicago, those are our top cities. It's interesting because we do have a very diverse audience. It really is a good mix of the white population, the Latinx population, non-Korean Asians, the Black community. So 90% of our audience is actually non-Korean, which when I first started working at this company, I couldn't believe it. So Koreans are actually not watching Cocoa. It is definitely the Americans, the Brazilians. And just a really quick funny story about the Brazil market is that the reason people usually come to us and they're like, why didn't you guys go into the Spanish countries first? But the Brazilians actually started a survey and they got thousands of signatures and they actually petitioned us to bring the Portuguese subtitles to them first. So that's actually why we started in Brazil. I mean, these fans are really into Korean dramas. They watch for 2 hours or more a day. And, you know, we just have 10,000 hours and growing every month. We're adding like 300 to 500 hours. There's just plenty to choose from. So it's really great to be part of, you know, just giving people that new, diverse, funny content that people desire in today's market.
I think definitely one of the biggest surprises is the lover of Korea content just in general. I mean, even if you look at who are attending, you know, some of the Korean concerts and not just BTS. I mean, clearly they have a huge wide group, but even there's an annual Korean concert that happens that's KCON, and it was the same surprise to me too that more than half were non-Asian. And that's such a surprise. This is such a big group that is being penetrated into the Korean content market. I'm wondering if any of you have any surprises in terms of what markets you guys were able to tap into with your content that might be kind of a surprise. Have you noticed anything on Eric or Craig?
Well, look, I think what's interesting about Korea, the content scene, is that it's relative to Japan and relative to China, a much smaller internal market. And so I think there's centers of content that and I put Spain, Turkey, Scandinavia, and Korea all in a group of countries where the content kind of outperforms the size of the country. And I think it's because in all of those cases, those markets feel a need to entertain the countries around them. So Turkish content has to travel to the Middle East and Germany, Scandi content has to go south, and Spanish content goes into Latin America, and Korean content goes everywhere. And so I think, you know, sort of the aha moment is that these countries, the creative communities in these countries feel an obligation to entertain and export, you know, and so that leads to really, really high quality, fun material relative to the bigger countries around them.
Yeah,
and just to add into it too, just you know, what I find personally, you know, as I bring a lot of these formats over to the U.S., is, you know, there's a lot of good formats around the world. A lot of them are very derivative in format nature. I've seen it done that. There's a lot of experimentation happening in Korea, especially in other Asian markets that are just wacky and weird. Not sure 100% if all of them will work, but they are different. And I think that's what we're craving right now in a lot of formats. They don't want to see the same. They don't want to see American Idol 5.0. They want to see something different, fresh, and that's smart. And I think that's where at least they're challenging themselves. Korea is as a market, trying to do different stuff, and then finding out what one of those formats relate to America. I mean, we were very lucky with Masked Singer. We're doing a spinoff called Masked Dancer. I did, My Little TV, which we did for PBS. So things that are different, it does work. People are buying them. But you have to be bold, and you have to look for the buyers that are willing to take the chance for something different as well.
So, Craig, do you think that is what is the it factor for Korean content? Like, what brings such a wide, diverse audience, and what do you think is the attraction to this kind of shows? I mean, especially for you on the reality side, and then also Eric, for you on the scripted side. Like, what do you think it is about this stuff? Is it because it is so wild and wacky on the reality side?
No, well, first of all, anything with masks work. So it started off before the whole mask craze for the rest of the world. I think it really is. It's just being really inventive and different, and that's what gravitated me to a lot of formats when I look at stuff now, especially. Mm-hmm. And I'm very lucky. I get first looks at a lot of stuff, but that's the thing. If I haven't seen it before, that's what I gravitate toward.
Yeah. And how about you, Eric, on the scripted side?
I would say it sort of thematically aligns with Craig, where it's less hegemony. It's like the idea that in Korea, a lot of the stories are written to be one and dones. It's the kind of 20 episode format. So it's not this thing of how do we continue something and drag it into oblivion. It's usually a single writer that has a vision. I mean, sometimes there'll be other writers attached. So there's a purity to what's being executed that doesn't get watered down by writers' rooms, and people in Hollywood are sometimes in love with the process by which scripted content is made, but having a single authorial voice is really, really interesting. I think it's that a lot of the great writers there happen to be women, and there's kind of really interesting female characters created. I don't think that's a coincidence. And then it's a willingness to go into genres that are really fun. And, Craig said wacky, and I kind of agree on the scripted side as well. There's time travel, fantasy, really far-fetched romance. And it's not treated as cheesy. It's treated as this is, our job is to entertain. And because it's been going on for so long, I think there's real confidence in the industry that this is something that they're good at. So there's not as much self-doubt. I feel like a lot of the Korean television producers are really willing to stick with their visions, and that ultimately yields really, really interesting shows.
Yeah, and also just to add on to for myself, especially with Masked Singer, it's finding the right partner. Like NBC has been fantastic in allowing the format to be adapted to the U.S. You can't just take the Korean show and do exactly the same thing. You have to customize it for that market, especially on the reality side. And what's that universal tone in that format? So it's also having that good partnership so you can go out of the boundaries of what they've already done and not being put back into a box. And I've been very lucky actually with the different networks and companies and shows I've been working on to have that luxury and trust to be able to change and tweak.
And I think that Korea's content is one of the things that makes it so special, as you said, they always seem to be experimenting and really pushing those boundaries. And the restriction on creativity, it's always been a creative-driven industry there. I definitely would like to maybe Justine can tell us, if there's what you think are like some of the popular genres of K content, and how Cocoa is kind of offering some of that.
Absolutely. And just to, add a little bit to what Eric was saying as well, because I agreed with him, just Eastern storytelling, Korean content storytelling is just so the complete opposite of Western storytelling. I mean, I use this example all the time. Think about Friends. It took Rachel and Ross 3 years, 3 seasons to finally kiss. So I think that satisfaction from having one season, kind of like that finality, one and done, it really it made Korean dramas so popular. But what's interesting, so for us, the Korean dramas and the reality shows do the best. But just to talk a little bit about the Korean dramas is that even though it's one season, people rewatch them over and over and over again, the way that they would watch Friends or Big Bang Theory. I think the cool thing is that, our company's only been around for about 3 years, and we still have shows like Coffee Prince, which aired back in 2007, and it's still in our top 10 programming every month. Same thing with Weightlifting Fairy of Kim Bak-jo, also premiered in 2016 in our top 10. Haram, the Poet Warrior, also is in our top 10, and that's on a monthly basis. So people do rewatch these stories, and they watch them like they would American television. So, there is that business monetization factor. And then after that, for us, the reality shows are really big, Craig's territory, but Running Man has been airing in Korea for the past 10 years, and it's our #1 property above the dramas. It's just a funny show. It's a hybrid competition show. You see the cool landscapes of Korea. People are willing to look past the subtitles because they just want to see this new exotic world. And then, what's really funny about this show too is that all the American actors are trying to get on the show. So Ryan Reynolds has been on it, Tom Cruise has been on it, Jack Black, some really big stars. So after this session, everybody go watch the Ryan Reynolds episode. It aired last year. It's super funny, but it's just, it's a unique content. Once you get past the subtitles, you're really going to open yourself up to a new and cool world, especially when people are running out of things to watch on TV after the COVID.
I've seen Jack Black on plenty of like just reality shows that just come up. It's really fun to watch. Justine, have you noticed any like similarities or differences between people who watch like K-dramas versus the remakes? Does that show up on your?
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of remakes. So like The Good Doctor, people are doing a lot of comparisons, doing a lot of figuring out like, oh, why did I like the Korean version better than the ABC version, or vice versa? So absolutely. And I think for the Latinx community, it's been, being able to watch novelas has really made it easier for them to transition into watching Korean dramas, the similar cultures, similar family values. So I'm tossing it to Craig.
Yes, Craig.
There's so much great stuff, back again, within the Korean formats that we can just highlight. But, I think it's more about, what's the future of the Korean formats and where we're heading now on the next evolution. There's a lot of eyeballs on Korea right now. And I'm looking at, the different producers and the networks, what's the next new thing that's going to happen? What's the next new innovation? Obviously, by the way, you were just talking about too, running out of content a little bit. It's really difficult right now shooting in COVID times. I just got done shooting Masked Singer 4. It's very expensive to shoot with COVID, protocols in place. You can do a show. It takes a little bit longer. It's a lot more expensive, but shows get done. And I'm lucky. I have a great network with Fox behind us. That helps finance all this extra money, obviously, to make shows. Not everyone has that luxury on cable and other places. So, that's something else that we have to contend with too. How do you do these bigger shows like that, and get them on the air in these times?
Well, I'm definitely grateful that you brought Masked Singer over. It's the one show that my kids and I like watch live, probably in years, right? So It's such a fun show, and you've definitely elevated it from even from the Korean version. Can you tell us more about creating for maybe some of the streaming platforms? You're definitely working on several more shows, like you mentioned the Masked Dancer and I guess Boys.
Yeah,
how's that working?
Yeah, so we also just got done shooting I Can See Your Voice, which is also another huge hit that's in Korea. Absolutely fun. And knock on wood, it's going to work over here. It's after Masked Singer, so you couldn't ask for a better lead-in on television. We have Ken Young, who's on our panel. He's actually hosting it. So, and by the way, he only did our show, Masked Singer, because his mom was a fan of Masked Singer. His mom made him do the show. That's probably the only time that anyone was ever cast because their mom made them actually participate in the show. And a funny unknown story there. But it's just a lot harder to get all this stuff done. No matter it's for a broadcaster or a streamer. But they're all hungry for content right now. It's just how can you get that content made and get into the pipeline?
Yeah, and I've also noticed that your company does something that really emphasizes on trying to interact with your audience from a social media level. How does that play in terms of like your viewership and the followers? Like, where does that come into play?
Oh, it's extremely important. I got to tell you. I listen to the viewers. I started doing that when I was doing America's Got Talent, but I really, every time our show airs, I have a team of people that monitor all feeds, and I'm watching everything else as it's happening live, and learning what they're talking about. What do they like? What do they don't like? It's great data research in the sense of what direction you're heading in. We're also this season on for Masked Singer, we opened it up to super fans for voting. So when we were taping, we actually showed feeds of all the performances and let everyone in America who wants to participate. You had to sign up, you had to sign NDAs, but that was great research as well. We opened it up and we let them talk to one another, and I got to see instantaneously before the show has even aired what they liked, what they didn't like, if there's a little tweaking we can do for song selections ahead of time. So I honestly think that's, listening to the public is extremely important to make a better show each season, especially for us as we, are making almost in real time. That input is very valuable.
I would have to agree. Cocoa has over 7 million social media followers, and there would be no Cocoa Brazil without social media. So that it's just such an important listening tool for us, making sure that we're letting everybody know about all the content, but then getting their feedback as well. And so now we're actually testing a live service on our platform as well, because there is that need for it. And it's actually direct from Korea live, and people tune in to, they want to see BTS and NCT Dream performing as soon as it's happening. So social media is definitely still relevant.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that Korea is such a big part of. They don't spend a lot of money on advertisement or P&A because so much of that is just from the audience's word of mouth that kind of spreads through social, that really kind of helps to create that interest into watching the next thing. So Eric, you're still looking for a lot of different types of content, and it does seem like you're also searching for international. Can you tell us a little bit more about like where you're looking, and how that comes about in terms of the Korean market and Korean IP?
Yeah, look, I think in general, you have multiple streamers that are trying to expand internationally. And my thesis is that it's going to be helpful as a producer to package things up. When I was on the other side, we saw a ton of good ideas where it was a script, but no director or not a big actor against it. And that that the networks were ending, or the platforms were doing a ton of the work on putting things together. And so I believe that the best thing that we can be doing as producers is bringing things that have really been thought through with sort of a knowable audience behind it. And so that means going after big IP. So for example, we have a project right now where we paired Alexander Aja, who's a big horror director, with a Stephen King novella, and we're trying to become the first Stephen King project that's non-English language. And so you have two audiences that are overlapping, Aja's audience and Stephen King. And in Japan, we've pursued a big video game and packaged up that video game with a big Japanese writer, and we were able to sell that into development. With respect to Korea, like, I think the big gold rush, which a lot of people are already looking at, is in webtoons. And I think, you know, if you look at manga to anime in Japan, and then you compare it with all the amazing writers that are doing webtoons these days in Korea, I think that's the biggest untapped potential for IP. And the platforms are kind of going after some of these webtoon writers, but there's, as you know, thousands and thousands of stories that haven't been done that are really, really rich and really have been thought through. And you know, there's big social media following behind a lot of these writers, as kind of Justine was talking about that you have to kind of listen to what these audiences are following. So I think that's a big opportunity.
Yeah, webtoon market, and what I've noticed is that the webtoons that are being published, I mean, talk about another place where creativity and experimentation kind of comes, for them to be able to, you know, tell some different stories in a different perspective, and how that kind of is now leaking into, you know, where producers are looking for more material to produce into other, you know, to TV shows and films and animations. It is. Yes.
Can I just touch on one other thing? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure,
coming up, when I was thinking about formats, it's interesting. There's a paradox that I can't quite unwind, which is, on the one hand, the source material of the shows themselves are so good, and so you see like The Good Doctor being a smash hit. On the other hand, like, you have platforms like Justine's and Netflix that are just bringing more and more Korean content to the world. And like, do people really want to see the second version of, say, My Love from a Star or something like that? Or is it just going to be the case that the original shows, I'm not talking so much about unscripted, but on the scripted side, that they're just going to become more and more popular as there's broader distribution?
That's a real good question. I don't know, Justine, if you have any insight on that.
I mean, what I've learned from social media and from the listening tools is that they love to compare and contrast. So for example, My Love from the Star, if ABC ever is able to remake that, they have the rights, the American rights to it, I think it would be a huge hit. But that's this audience. Even though it's a broad, most, you know, American diverse audience, they love to compare and contrast. And then just to add about the webtoons, Extraordinary You would never have been made without the Korean webtoon that it was based on, and that was one of our biggest dramas last year. So it's great that the Korean webtoons are the best, and now they're inspiring all of this content.
So to kind of go back on your comment, Eric, in terms of the audience, and they're now, you know, like, where are we in terms of the consumption for this 4K content? Like, do you feel that people are still starting to discover it, or do most people have watched a lot of the stuff that's at least the popular things up there? Or you know, in terms of its potential for growth, like, where do you feel we are?
Well, my instinct is that either between remakes of unscripted or just having broad distribution platforms like Netflix, like, the bigger shows are going to be reaching audiences that are in aggregate bigger than most network TV in the US. And maybe it's coming more globally, so maybe it's a combined Brazil, US, European audience, whatever. But I basically think you have to view these things as these shows as having global scope. And I think, secondarily, you have to look at what's happening in the world of SVOD these days. And 50% of the broadband markets in the world are in Asia, but that's not the demographics of the streamers to date. So as the global streamers become better and more complete in their strategies in Asia, it's probably going to be the case that Korean content is going to be like on the front of that, right? And that the audiences are only going to get bigger as you have kind of global penetration from SVOD services.
Yeah. So Justine, I've watched a lot of content on platforms like Netflix and Hulu, and I just finished watching Hi Jekyll and Me on Viki, which I noticed that was one of Kakoa's properties. And there's more OTT platforms coming online, and it just seems to be expanding. What made you guys decide to sell your content directly to the big studios instead of having it on your own platform? Was that a strategic? What was your strategic thinking behind that?
So kind of like what Eric said, there is a lot of content. So, their production costs are high. So there are a few shows that we do distribute to other studios, and that's just kind of to help fund like the creation of so much content. But you bring up a good point about Viki. So that's something actually I wanted to clear up today, because there is a lot of consumer confusion and also partner confusion. A lot of the other streaming platforms are like, what is the difference between you and Viki? You guys have similar content. Basically, we are partners. They are a B2B partner, and we are an add-on service on Viki. We do have a different demo, actually, because they are servicing all of the Pan-Asian content. Well, for us, we are a one-stop shop of Korean content. So we're that platform that's just servicing Korean content, making it really easy for consumers to kind of create their own experience around Korean content as well, because we do offer a variety of free and paid subscriptions. But basically, our platform, because we have over 10,000 hours, I know I've said it several times, but that's a lot of content, and we are adding 300 to 500 hours per month. It's just Korean content. That's all we can manage. I'm just kidding. We can manage everything, but it's just the opportunity for people that really love Korean shows to come to us, experience just Korean content. And if they want more than that, they can go to Viki, and Viki is one of our partners.
I've now subscribed to the highest level of Viki, so I can just get through all of my content quickly. I was wondering, from your guys' perspective, do you have any suggestions or things you feel could be better, and that will allow Korean content to stay on the forefront of expansion and mainstream? Are there areas in which you feel it could be better? And maybe Coca could be listening to some of this to help us implement some of this stuff. Do you guys have any suggestions on what could make it better and easier for you guys, from content distributors and creators?
I think more panels like these, the more that we can band together and really show people, get over it, read some subtitles. You're going to be exposed to a whole new world. Such good stories. It's really fun content. And I think really the more that we band together, I think to keep getting the word out there, the more that we'll get the audience there.
Yeah. For me, especially on the reality side, I think it comes down to, markets go in and out of favor. It just happens, and right now, it's still prime time for Korea, and I think they can be longer. They have a longer shelf life than a lot of the other markets have had if they constantly keep pushing the boundaries and make great partnerships. Honestly, if they continue having the same experience that I've been having and that Fox has been having, and my other networks. With the projects that I have, it's going to be great, you know. And so I think that open communication and just pushing the boundaries and creativity will make them last longer. When that stops, it all stops. But hopefully it doesn't.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Eric?
I'd say some tactical things are that on the production side, the just the way contracts get done in Hollywood versus Seoul is quite different. And I would just say that there could be an investment in just meeting of the minds of how do you close deals, how do you access IP. And I know that I think there's sometimes there's great interest from producers here where they just kind of run out of steam because it's hard. That's partially the opportunity, because if you can figure out these things that like Craig did, that's amazing. But it could be easier to transactionally. I would say a second thing on the scripted side is like I sometimes see this. I saw this a lot with Spain prior to Casa de Papel coming out, that there was almost like a self-modesty. It was like Korean or Spanish shows in that case could only be of a certain size. They had to be produced in a particular closed studios. And it's almost like there's no reason why there shouldn't be a $6, $7, $8 million per hour scripted drama come out of Korea if it's the right idea. And I sometimes feel like we're contained by our own fears and anxieties of what the standard is, but that when something breaks, it's going to be like, I would fully expect over the next couple years for Korea to produce like, say, 4 or 5 of the top 20 to 25 scripted shows in the world, right? And so why couldn't there be the next Game of Thrones out of Korea, for example? I bet it will happen, and I bet there will be the people that take the boldest bets will win.
Well, I think that would be incredible if that was going in that direction. I think, you know, just to kind of give a little backstory in terms of the transactional aspects of it, you know, Korea is still a relatively new market for exporting IPs. And so a lot of the content creators there have not dealt with a lot of this, but all of that very soon will get more streamlined, I hope. And maybe that is something that Coca can help us with. I thank you very much for all of your feedback and your comments, and I love this discussion. We will move on to a couple of questions and close this out. We do have one question that is asking from Michael, you know, what were some of the unexpected countries that Korean content was popular besides Brazil?
I can talk. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Argentina, Peru, Mexico, since we are distributed in, I think, 34 countries in across the Americas and the territories, Puerto Rico, it's just the Latino community has really come to watch the Korean shows. And it's just, like I said earlier, I think it's the similar family values, similar cultural values. So for me, that's been the biggest surprise. I mean, when I first started working at this company, my 91-year-old Mexican grandmother knew more about Korean dramas than I did.
It's always surprising when other people know more about Korean content than I do. But one of the funniest things I heard was that Nigeria was a very big, surprising market. And I always am trying to still understand what the commonality is. But maybe there's a lot of housewives in Nigeria. I don't know. But they seem to be consuming a lot of content there. Another question, what are you watching right now? And what are some of the things that, or maybe what is your, you know, favorite shows to watch? That's definitely something people ask me all the time. Is there anything in particular that's caught your eye recently?
One oldie that I keep coming back to, and I was rewatching it the other day, is Signal, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and I think it's one of the best TV seasons that I've ever ever seen. And I'm watching it again, and it just holds up really, really well.
For me, it's Into the Ring. It's a new drama that just finale'd, 16 episodes, so not like a big watch, but it's just a world, especially being an American, it's a world that you never see, the Korean politics world. It's a really fun show, very funny, very submersive, which I was very surprised about. Really young cast, a little bit hipster, but especially right now as we're about to go into election season, I think it's just a really relevant, funny show that everybody should check out.
Interesting. For me, it was, recently I've just been watching it because I watch a lot of reality, to be honest. But I was watching it was called Welcome to Life from Korea as well, and I love that concept, and just especially where we are right now, where people want to go back to pre-COVID times, and compared to COVID times, there's a lot of parallels within that one that what we're living in right now.
Fantastic. I'm watching so many things all at once. On the reality side, I call it Island, which is the new big hit competition show where they're training new K-pop performers. And it's amazing how talented these people are. And in the past, same thing, iBand too, where they take talent and mix them all up and make them create their own bands, and they have to perform on an instant. Fantastic. All-time classic. I think recently my kids are into, they watch Itaewon Class on Netflix several times. The Secret World of the Married, which was the first time on TV where a female was having an extramarital affair, which is a little bit unheard of in K-dramas. And that's starting to break all kinds of other now traditions of, the way that people are telling stories in Korea. It's really fun. One more question. They're asking what advice you might have for Korean content creators seeking a way into the market. It's kind of a tough question to answer.
Into which markets, Kimber?
I would assume the U.S. market. So Korean content creators seeking a way into the U.S. market. I think one way you can connect with Coca. I'll answer that. Try to connect with Coca because I do know that every year they have, or were having before the pandemic, pitching sessions for any of your content. But I don't know, Eric, if you have any advice on that side.
My advice is don't seek it. Like, do the best shows you can. I felt like this happened in Latin America, where the desire for actors, for example, and creators was to move to LA. And I think Seoul is like the epicenter of really interesting international content. So I would say, be less focused. Not that this question asker is coming on with a strong opinion, but Hollywood is not the end all be all. Let's make the best shows we can around the world, and they will find global audiences at this point.
That's a great advice. There's a question for Justine. They're asking what is maybe your top few shows on Cocoa platform that are scripted and unscripted that are popular.
Right. So I did mention the classic shows that are constantly in the top 10, The Weightlifting Fairy, Harong, The Poet Warrior, Coffee Prince, but Running Man is definitely our #1 show. And then we have a new show that just premiered, Do You Like Brahms? It's a rom-com. Do You Like Brahms? And then it's a really, I'm not actually usually a rom-com fan, but it's a really cute show, really sweet story, really cool perspective about going to music, kind of giving out, in Korean culture, everybody wants to go into business and get their MBA. And I think this person gives up their career in business to go back to school, starts all over again, and to go into music. So I think that's been one of our top 10 shows in the last month. But yeah, a few others are mostly reality shows. Home Alone, that voyeur going into the inside world of K-pop stars and, all the big idols. And then Masters in the House. Masters in the house. Also, like where you take over for your boss for the day. It's a group of guys that take over for the boss for the day. So they're kind of like the butler. But yeah, it's just like all of that content that gives you that inside perspective into Korean culture is in our top 10.
Fantastic. If there isn't anything else you'd like to add, I definitely want to thank all of you guys for participating in this discussion, and I hope that it was helpful to the audience. I know that, is there anything else that you would like to say before we close out?
No, I just want to say thank you, Coca, and I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and just keep it up. I mean, you promote green content so well, and I think that's extremely important right now.
Thanks, Kimber.
Yes.
Thank
so
you.
Lastly, I'd like to close out with Coca. They wanted me to mention that the U.S. office will be launching an online platform to introduce some of the latest Korean content to the U.S. buyers in November. So please contact the Coca office if you want to learn more about Korea content or are interested in doing business with Korean companies. And we'll close out with their contact slide so we can bring that up. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank
you. Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
Bye.